Hey everyone, I'm Scott from Myelitis and welcome to episode number 7 of Scott's Story. Now after what seems like forever, I finally have some more updates to share with you about how my MOG antibody disease recovery journey is going. In this video I'm going to be talking about what is happening with a potential preventative treatment since my second anti-MOG antibody test came back positive in December, current improvements in my condition and how I'm managing my condition in this current environment with the pandemic. So let's get started. So a quick recap from last episode, and I'm sure you'll need it because I'd forgotten what I talked about in the last episode, was that I had received my MOG antibody test back and it was positive as of December 2020. And so my neurologist was recommending that I go into a preventative treatment to try and stop any future attacks from happening. Azathioprine was a treatment which he was pushing for, and I'd had blood tests to check if I was able to start the treatment. I'd also had an MRI scan which showed significant improvements from the one which I had when I was in hospital suffering from transverse myelitis symptoms caused by MOG antibody disease. However, there were some signs of scarring in the spinal cord, which was found in the scan, which also explains why I have some residual symptoms. Finally, I had finished the Leeds Parks Challenge where I had completed 10 5k runs, and I plan to continue running and spend some time in the gym to do some weightlifting to keep my bones strong due to being on steroids for well over a year now. Okay, so the first thing which I'm going to be talking about is what's happening with the preventative treatment and the azathioprine. And the blood tests have come back fine and I'm basically ready to start azathioprine whenever. But my neurologist has called me and said that he wants me to drop from, I'm currently taking 2.5 milligrams of prednisolone steroids each day, and he now wants me to drop to 1 milligram of steroids each day for 4 weeks. Now I'm currently on day 3 of being on 1 milligram and I haven't noticed too many side effects. I've had a couple of hot flushes at times, but overall nothing too serious yet so far, so fingers crossed that keeps on going well. Plan is that once I've been on 1 milligram of prednisolone steroids for 4 weeks, we are then going to try and come off of steroids completely and start azathioprine treatment, a dose of 25 milligrams 2 times a day. And after 2 weeks of this amount, we're then going to increase it to 50 milligrams twice a day. And then after another 2 weeks, increase it to 75 milligrams twice a day. And that's where we're going to be holding the dose at. The plan is to be on azathioprine for 1 to 2 years and then to wean off of the azathioprine until I'm on no treatment, providing that there's no issues or relapses in this time. And the reasoning behind this is that if you are going to have a relapse with MOG antibody disease, then it tends to happen in the first 2 years after you've had your first attack or first instance or relapse of it. And the azathioprine is basically just to take me out of that 2-year time frame. I'm just over a year now past my attack and I've been on steroids for quite a while now, so there's also long-term effects of being on steroids for that long, hence why we wanted to swap to azathioprine. And part of me did just want to wean off all treatments completely and just see if I relapse, just in case my case was monophasic and it was only a one-off. But after speaking with the neurologist about it, I think this is a better way of doing it, just to use the medications to take past the 2-year time frame, just to make sure that if I'm going to relapse, it's going to be less likely if we get through that time frame of 2 years. But it's also avoiding the risk of just coming off of everything completely and potentially triggering a relapse that way, because I'm technically still positive for anti-MOG antibodies at this time. And I guess one other thing to also mention is there are some potential risks or issues with taking azathioprine for the long term. And one of the ones which stood out for me is that there is like a small cancer risk if you were to take it for the long term, and that did concern me, and that's what I spoke to the neurologist about. And in his eyes it was completely fine because we were only using it for a short amount of time currently, or that's what the plan is, providing everything goes right. So after considering it all, then taking azathioprine for a few years at most, I think the risk of cancer from that short a time frame is fine. It's reduced a lot more from the things that I've read. So I think it is the best choice, and that's what I'll be going ahead with. So fingers crossed that there's no issues with either the taper down to 1 milligram of steroids or starting azathioprine, but I'll keep you guys updated with what happens with that. And hope, fingers crossed, no more relapses or issues. So the next thing I want to talk about is the small improvements to my symptoms. And I guess the only main symptom that I have at this point is my bladder, and I still get weird urgency issues where it feels like I don't get a lot of time to go to the toilet. But recently started to improve a little bit. It's felt like I no longer get the urgency to go as much now. And usually what I do is, providing I'm in a suitable place, is that I try and leave it for a few minutes just to see if the urge disappears. Because sometimes that does happen. It feels like I do urgently need to go, but then if I leave it a little bit of time, sometimes the urge goes away. So I do try and tend to leave it unless I do really need to go and the urge doesn't go away. Now, you might not be able to tell as I'm sat here in my hoodie, but the weather in the UK has actually been really warm in the last 3 weeks or so. And during this time, it's felt like I haven't had to go to the toilet as much, which is a bit strange. And I presume that this is because the higher temperatures would mean that you naturally sweat more and release more water that way, and then therefore you're less likely to go to the toilet. But on the other hand, I've been drinking a lot more water because of the hot weather, so I'm not quite sure what's happened, but for some reason this is why I think it's an improvement. So for example, this room which I sit in at the moment is my office because I'm currently working from home, but we don't have air conditioning here in many of the buildings, mainly because we don't need it for most of the year. It's generally a lot cooler, and most of the houses here are built to retain heat rather than lose heat. So it's actually been a lot warmer inside the house and out on a number of occasions, so maybe that also contributed to it as well. I'm not too sure, but it's definitely interesting because a lot of people with MOG antibody disease actually do see that their symptoms change when things get hotter, and a lot of the time it's for the worse for some people, but it seems weirdly mine's gone the other way. Now, I'm not too sure if this is just like, this is me feeling what's happened, but it's actually not what's happened. It's just my observations, and I don't think I can scientifically prove it or anything, but just an interesting observation. I do feel like I'm still slowly improving, and these improvements are very, very small, taken from like the last few months. It doesn't feel like just one day something's just suddenly got a lot better. It must be very, very small increments where I'm improving over a long period of time, and so much so that you don't notice it on a day-to-day thing. And since the last update, I've also managed to continue running and started going to the gym a lot more too, especially to lift the weights to try to counteract some of the issues of taking steroids for long term, since I'm now well over a year of taking them, and I didn't want my bones to get weaker due to the steroids. And overall, I just hope things slowly do keep improving. I think I've come a long way from what I was like when I was in hospital. It still feels like I'm recovering now, and this is well over a year on. So hopefully things continue to improve, and we'll see how far I can get. So finally, I want to talk about how I've been managing my conditions in a now out of lockdown UK. And I guess the first thing that happened was probably about a month ago now. I went to an event in a different town, which involved me taking multiple train journeys and a fair walk to get to where I was staying. And I stayed over for a night at the weekend, and I was able to manage the bladder issues by making sure that I planned out my trip beforehand, and I looked for the train stations which had open toilets or ones which were less likely to be closed than others. And by making sure that I managed my water intake well on the day of the travel, so I try and not drink as much before I was about to go on the train, just had a small bottle of water which I was sipping. And then when I eventually got there, I was able to have a proper drink when there was plenty of places open. And yeah, overall it went a lot better than what I was expecting. And a big part of that was also by utilising self-catheterisation before I set off and at different parts during the trip, so when it was needed, just to make sure that there was no chance of having like an accident or getting an urge at like a wrong time. It all went pretty well, surprisingly well actually, when, for me that was my first kind of big time going outside of my city since I was hospitalised and had all these bladder issues. And to actually see it like work, it was definitely reassuring, especially when you're not quite sure what to expect. It is kind of like jumping into the deep end of a pool, and you kind of have to just see how it goes. There's certain things which you can't control. You can only control so much of it. So to see it turn out really well without any issues was just great. And it's, again, I guess another sign of improvement. I guess that was probably the biggest update in terms of like managing life outside of lockdown. That was good, and definitely gave me a lot of reassurance that I can manage my symptoms, even if they weren't to get any better. If they were to just stay just as they are, that I was still able to kind of live my life and do things that I enjoy, and it's not going to put me off doing things like that. So that was good. So a summary of this episode was that I've now tapered from 2.5 milligrams of steroids to 1 milligram each day. And after 4 weeks, I'll be starting azathioprine treatment at 25 milligrams twice a day, providing everything goes well with the taper and there's no issues. Recently, my symptoms have seemed to improve over the last few months or so, and I've also been able to manage my symptoms better lately, especially when I travelled to an event which was out of my city last month, which I thought was a good sign of improvement in itself. Thanks for watching the video, and if you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to give it a like and subscribe, it really helps. And thanks again, and I'll catch you in the next video.